5,000 workers, 3 million hats a year, an empire built on 9 acres. And now, silence. This was once the largest hat factory on Earth until someone decided it was worth more gone than alive. What followed was not just closure, it was erasure. Welcome inside the silent Stetson hat factory. To understand how something this large could disappear, you have to go back to the man who built it, a sick man with 60 borrowed dollars and one idea. John Batterson Stetson was born in 1830 in Orange, New Jersey, the 7th of 12 children. His father, Stephen, was a hatter, and John learned the trade before he ever attended a day of school. His mother taught him to read at home. By his mid-20s, doctors had given him a diagnosis that most men would have stayed home to accept: tuberculosis, a short time to live. But Stetson did not stay. He went west, landed in St. Joseph, Missouri, and bought into a brickyard. Then, a river flood destroyed the business and everything he had put into it. He tried to enlist during the Civil War and was rejected for his health. So he joined a prospecting expedition to Pikes Peak, Colorado, to try his luck panning for gold. It was there, of all places, that the idea for the hat arrived. Out in the Rockies, living rough, Stetson remembered what his father had taught him about felting. He used the technique to press animal fur into a waterproof fabric, then shaped it into a hat with a high crown that trapped warm air and a wide brim wide enough to keep off both sun and rain. The other men in the expedition wore coonskin caps that attracted fleas, fell apart in wet weather, and offered no shade. A passing cowboy spotted Stetson's hat, asked to try it on, and handed over $5 in gold right there on the spot. Stetson took the money, watched the man ride away wearing his hat, and understood that he had just sold something the West desperately needed. He spent another year out west, and his health slowly came back. In 1865, at 35 years old, he returned to Philadelphia with that one idea and $60 borrowed from his sister Louisa. He rented a single room at 7th and Callow Hill Streets, hired 2 workers, and started making hats. He named the first design the Boss of the Plains: lightweight, fur felt, 4-inch crown, 4-inch brim, waterproof, and durable enough to use as a bucket for watering a horse. He stamped his own name in gold on every hat band, which at the time was an unusual thing to do. Then he mailed a sample hat and a letter to every merchant he could identify across the Southwest, asking for a minimum order of a dozen. The orders came back immediately. Cowboys and ranchers fanning out across the West during the post-Civil War cattle boom wanted exactly this hat, and nobody else was making it. Within a year, the one-room workshop could not keep up with demand. Stetson moved to larger premises twice, and by 1874 he had a proper factory on Germantown Avenue in the Kensington neighborhood of Philadelphia. By 1886, 21 years after borrowing that money from his sister, Stetson was running the largest hat company in the world. The name had stopped being just a brand. Across the American West, Stetson had replaced the word hat entirely. Buffalo Bill wore one. Annie Oakley wore one. The Texas Rangers adopted it as their official headgear. Tom Mix wore one in 291 films. The factory was turning out close to 2 million hats a year. And when John Stetson died in 1906, the campus he had built on those original 9 acres in North Philadelphia employed 5,400 workers across 25 buildings, producing over 3 million hats annually. Revenue had reached $11 million a year, the equivalent of roughly $200 million today. 16 million animal pelts moved through the facility during peak production, hats shipped to over a dozen countries, all from one address. What most people do not know is that Stetson built something far bigger than a hat factory on those 9 acres. He built a world for his workers to live inside. There was a hospital on the campus, started as a small free dispensary in 1887, and eventually grown into a fully staffed, accredited 75-bed medical facility. Workers paid $1 every 3 months for full coverage. Those who could not afford even that received care at no charge. Stetson set up a building and loan association that helped over 1,000 employees buy their own homes. Workers received shares of common stock in the company. He built a library, athletic fields, a gymnasium, and the largest non-denominational Sunday school in Philadelphia. He funded kindergartens for the children of workers. He opened classes that helped hundreds of Italian immigrant hatters learn English and earn citizenship. One man, Mike Korsnack, clocked in for 52 years and 9 months before he retired in 1963. In May 1906, 3 months after Stetson's death, the centerpiece of the campus opened, a 5,500-seat auditorium, the largest in Philadelphia, built for concerts, civic events, roller skating, and the Christmas gathering that the whole workforce attended each year. Single men received hats, married men received turkeys, women received candy and gloves. Here's the thing about all of that generosity, though. It was not charity. Every hospital visit, every stock share, every Christmas turkey was calculated. Stetson was deeply opposed to unions, and he understood that the best way to keep a union out was to give workers a life so comfortable inside the company that organizing against it would feel ungrateful. The strategy worked for a long time, but it rested on one condition that nobody in management was examining. The hat business had to stay profitable enough to pay for everything. The moment it stopped being profitable, the whole arrangement would unravel. Stetson had been dead for 30 years when that moment came. By the 1930s, the Depression had eaten into revenues, and the company quietly began stripping back the programs. The Christmas bonuses disappeared. The paid furloughs ended. Workers who had been told for decades that the company was their family found themselves facing unpaid layoffs with no explanation. In 1936, they struck. They won union recognition, a 40-hour work week, and an end to the company's internal efficiency monitoring. The loyalty that Stetson's welfare system had purchased turned out to be real only as long as the benefits kept coming. The factory recovered through the late 30s, modernized and consolidated its operations. During World War II, the government redirected Stetson's production capacity, and the hat factory became a parachute factory for several years. While after the war, it returned to hats, and for a while, things looked strong again. By 1947, revenue had climbed back to $29 million, the highest the company had ever recorded. Hats were going to over a dozen countries. It felt like the worst was behind them. It was not, because while Stetson was recovering, something was quietly shifting in American culture that no hat company on earth had the power to reverse. Americans were starting to stop wearing hats. The change had actually been building for decades. Students in New York had organized an informal anti-hat movement as far back as the mid-1920s, treating the hat as a symbol of stuffy conformity. The soldiers coming home from World War II discovered that they felt perfectly comfortable going without one. As cars became lower and rooflines dropped, wide-brimmed hats became awkward to wear inside them. The post-war counterculture rejected formality and dress as part of a broader rejection of the previous generation's values. Any one of these shifts would have been manageable. All of them arriving together was not. And then came January 20th, 1961. The hat industry had been watching the new president closely. They had commissioned a silk top hat for John Kennedy's inauguration and hoped that a young, fashionable president wearing a great hat on national television might reverse the trend. Kennedy wore the hat briefly for a few minutes during the ceremony, then took it off. What the cameras showed for the rest of that afternoon was a bare-headed president standing in the January wind with his hair moving freely. The image felt modern, unguarded, alive. The hat felt like something from his father's era. After that day, the social expectation that a properly dressed American man wore a hat in public essentially collapsed. The numbers tell the rest of the story plainly. $29 million in revenue in 1947, $8 million in 1968, a fall of more than 70% in just over 2 decades. The factory that had been built for 5,000 workers and 1.4 million square feet of production was running at a fraction of what it needed to be viable. Management could see the problem. What they could not see was any way out of it. What happened next made the outcome permanent. As revenue declined through the 1960s, the Stetson family began quietly selling their shares. A New York investor named Ira Gilden, who ran a financial holding company called Ramco Enterprises, started acquiring them. By 1968, he had majority control. The company that a hater's son had started with 60 borrowed dollars was now owned by someone who had never made a hat and had no interest in making one. Gilden looked at 9 acres of underutilized real estate in North Philadelphia and reached the conclusion that a financier always reaches in that situation. The asset was worth more liquidated than operated. In 1971, the Stetson factory in Philadelphia closed. After 106 years, the machines stopped. The 25 buildings went quiet. The auditorium that had held 5,000 workers at Christmas went dark. The hospital that had been delivering babies and setting broken bones since 1887 saw its last patient and locked its doors. 6 years later, the company handed the land to the city of Philadelphia. The city demolished most of the complex in 1979, but held back 4 buildings with the intention of preserving them: the clock tower, the gymnasium, the auditorium, the fitting room. On September 4th, 1980, someone set fire to what was left. The arson tore through the remaining structures that night. The 7-story clock tower collapsed into itself. Inside it, the 2,500-pound bronze bell that had hung there since 1892, the bell that had called 5,000 workers to their shifts every morning and sent them home every evening for nearly a century, fell through the burning floors and hit the ground below. Someone pulled the clapper from the wreckage before anyone could stop them. A teenager later offered to give it back for $150. Nobody paid. 106 years, 5,000 workers, a hospital, an auditorium, gone in a single night. The only original structure still standing from the entire Stetson campus is the old hospital building, now a community health center that treats addiction. A few miles away on Sansom Street, the stone exterior of 1225 still has the words John B. Stetson Company carved into it. That was the back entrance to a retail store that closed long ago. It is one of the last things in Philadelphia that still carries his name. So what does this story actually tell us? The easy answer is that Americans stopped wearing hats, and Stetson could not survive the loss of its market. That is true, but it misses something important. Stetson did not just lose a market. It lost its reason for existing before the market even disappeared. The welfare system that defined the company for half a century was never really about the workers. It was a mechanism for control, and the moment it became too expensive to maintain, management abandoned it without hesitation. What had looked like a community was revealed to be a transaction. Once the workers understood that, the relationship was never the same. And when the Stetson family stepped back and let a financial holding company take over, the fate of the factory was settled. The man who took control had no attachment to hat making, no loyalty to North Philadelphia, no reason to fight for a struggling business when the real estate under it had value. Great companies built by people who believed in what they made can survive almost anything. Companies reduced to assets on a balance sheet rarely survive the first serious test. The Stetson name itself did survive. In the 1980s, riding a wave of Western nostalgia brought on by films like Urban Cowboy and the Indiana Jones series, someone tried to revive the brand. Manufacturing restarted. The boss of the planes went back into production, but the revival lasted only 6 years before the company filed for bankruptcy in 1986. The brand was sold to Hat Brands Incorporated, and today Stetson hats are made in Garland, Texas, by a company called Hatco Incorporated. You can still buy the hat. It is a good hat. But the factory where it was born, the campus, the hospital, the auditorium, the bell, all of that is gone. The 9 acres in North Philadelphia have been cleared and rebuilt. The people living there today never heard the bell ring. In 2019, that bell was pulled out of a museum storage warehouse where it had been sitting for nearly 40 years. Temple University installed it in a gallery a few blocks from where the factory once stood and invited people to come and hear it ring one more time. For a few months it did. Then it went back into storage, and the silence returned. John Stetson built one of the most generous worker welfare systems in American manufacturing history, and he designed every piece of it to prevent his workers from ever needing a union. Was he a great employer or simply a sophisticated one? Leave your answer in the comments. Subscribe to the Rust Archive. We tell the stories of the factories, companies, and industries that built America and then went silent. New videos every week. If this story deserves to be remembered, share it.